Hello once again, and welcome back to episode 7 of the AtlantaCast. Today we are tackling episode 7 of Atlanta, and that episode is called B.A.N, which stands for Black American Network, right?
Yes.
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, this episode is probably the most experimental of the bunch so far, and this one I was really eager to get to. It's, in my opinion, one of the best episodes in the entire show.
I
But
agree.
before we
I
dive
liked it a
headfirst into
lot.
that, yeah. Before we dive headfirst into that, as always, I got to remind everybody that we do have a Patreon and would majorly appreciate any support you guys want to give us on that front. $5 tier, that'll get you a shout out at the end of each episode. $10 tier will get you access to episodes of the AtlantaCast 2 weeks early. You could be hearing this episode 2 weeks if you're a patron right now. You could be hearing episode 9 right now if you were patroned and you're listening to this on YouTube. $15 tier, that'll get you access to bonus episodes of the AtlantaCast where we talk about generally Donald Glover-esque media, things like music videos and other films and stuff that he's been involved in. So check it out. It's a fun time. But anyway,
On to
B.A.N.
the episode. B.A.N. B.A.N. I think Black American Network is loosely analogous to the B.E.T. network, I think, which is a real thing.
I don't know. I don't know news networks.
Neither do I. I dropped my cable subscription a long time ago. But the episode opens with a commercial, which you, as a casual viewer, would not recognize as part of the episode. I actually noticed upon my second viewing of this thing the absence of the little ad icon on Hulu. There's usually a little square in the top right-hand corner which says ad, and it did not strike me as unusual at all, because this is a commercial for a Dodge Charger, the vehicle, the car. We see a young man with a ball cap on driving a sporty car, and he's got a big grin on his face. He flashes the peace sign, and he apparently loves this car. So it is kind of setting the stage for the reappearance of this Dodge Charger commercial. It comes back 2 more times later in the episode. So I won't spoil the punchline of the third and final commercial in this, but we're just introduced to it at first. And actually, after watching it the second time, I noticed that the guy's baseball hat actually has the word Atlanta on it. So there's a little there's a little Easter egg in there that would have clued you in. But it really looked like a real commercial. I don't know. What did you think?
Oh, well, yeah, I noticed, I mean, when I first watched this, I've seen this episode 3 times now, but when I first watched this episode, I was like, is this a real commercial? Because immediately, because usually when I was watching this on Hulu, I usually, I was like, the episode would play or ads would play, and then the episode would play, and then it would go back to ads, and the usual ads that I was used to played. And then this started. There was that little cut to black screen, and then this little opening segment started up again. And I was like, I'm pretty sure. I thought that it was the show, and I didn't. And I immediately noticed that there was no ad pending thing in the top right corner, but I wasn't sure until the second one when or it goes from this immediately to the B.A.N. intro or whatever, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm pretty sure that was part of the show.
So what commercials are you getting, the actual commercials that Hulu is providing? I get some weird old guy commercials for pharmaceuticals and things that are obviously targeted to me. But yeah, that Dodge Charger commercial actually didn't strike me as out of the demo. For me, I was like, yeah, I might buy a car
I think it's
sometime.
supposed to ease you into it.
Yeah.
Or it's supposed to
for.
make you think that maybe it is a real ad.
Exactly, yeah, and
then
it totally worked on me. And it did strike me that these were all African Americans in the commercial, but that didn't bump me at all, because
I was gonna say that when you said that you were getting ads targeted to you. I would imagine that these ads seem to be targeted towards people living in Atlanta.
Yes.
I guess specifically African Americans living in Atlanta, seeing as that's like the main demographic that we have been focused on in this show thus far.
I think subconsciously I was thinking, well, this is a car ad that would fit my demo. I might be somebody who would
Yeah,
buy
I
a
mean
car,
car ads.
but
I
it's
see
also
car
it
ads too.
also
Like car
fits
ads are
the
one of the most common types of ads.
yes, but it also
So
fit the
that's
demo of
another thing.
somebody
Like when you
watching
get to
Atlanta.
the what is it? Like the commercial where they're like cutting open the cigars or whatever. It's like,
Yeah,
I mean, obviously that one's
that's a
a
parody.
joke, but
Yeah.
like with this one, it's like a car commercial is something that anybody could get, but like
Yeah.
nobody is getting commercials for, or like only specific types of people are getting targeted commercials for, like, maybe specific beer brands or yeah, like cigars and stuff like that. I don't, are you even allowed to advertise for like cigarettes and cigars
Not
anymore? I don't
anymore.
know.
No.
Yeah. Um
Cigars, maybe. Nah, probably not even cigars. So anyway, the episode opens what appears to be the beginning of the episode, which is really not. But anyway, it's a talk show format. We're introduced to this guy named Montague, Franklin Montague. The name of the show is Montague. It's his name, and he's this well-spoken, well-dressed young black man who introduces the topic of, and I'm quoting here, the growing outlook of accepted sexuality and its effects on black youth and culture. It's a little curiously phrased, but whatever. We see that Alfred, Paperboy, is one of the two guests, and the second guest is a white female author whose name is Deborah Holt, and she's there apparently promoting a book, and she's identified as the head of the Center for Trans American Issues. So it's a talk show format. Those two are sitting next to each other, and this guy Montague is the interviewer, the journalist,
moderating,
yes,
quote unquote.
Well, he immediately directs the first question at Paperboy and challenges Paperboy's use of transphobic language, which apparently occurred during a Twitter rant in which he said he did not want to F Caitlyn Jenner. And we all know Caitlyn Jenner is a trans woman, formerly Bruce Jenner, the Olympic athlete.
Yeah, and again, like another instance of real people being placed in this fictional TV show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Paperboy says, apparently in his Twitter rant, he said he didn't want to F Caitlyn Jenner.
I think specifically he said it was like y'all the N words who said I was crazy for not wanting to F word Caitlyn Jenner. That was the exact line he reads off, I believe.
So Paperboy says he really did not feel the need to explain his statement and that he meant what he said, and he goes on to say that Caitlyn Jenner is quote not super important to me, which is kind of unsatisfying to Franklin. And he also admits his ignorance on this issue. He says, actually, I got my notes.
He says he only just found out about trans people yesterday, which I think is an exaggeration, but
yeah,
he's
so
saying he's not knowledgeable.
It's kind of lame.
Or it's a culture or a cultural phenomena, I guess you could say, that he's not really in the know about.
Yeah, I mean, part of me says, okay, this show was made in when?
2016. This season 1 would have been 2016.
So this is pretty.
So it would have been in production probably earlier than that,
So if you had asked me, in 2016, am I familiar with the trans issue? I probably would have been fairly ignorant. I mean, I actually live in a pretty progressive area, so I am tuned into it. But I gave him a pass on that, just with the knowledge that this was supposed to be 2016. But it's a pretty lame statement that sort of shows his ignorance.
I mean, I feel like this. I mean, I get the inclination to do that. I feel like, giving, like, whether or not we're like giving Paperboy a pass is kind of like, uh, that's like not the central focus of what this episode is all about. It's not. I don't think it's necessarily about uh, like passing judgment on Paperboy. Although you absolutely like can do that based on like, and you can do that with any of the characters based on like the dialogue they have with each other. I think it's more so about just kind of like, uh, I don't know, getting the audience to think about like the issues that like
Yeah,
this
I think
episode
that's
brings
right.
up, because it sends a lot of conflicting like, the show itself sends a lot of like conflicting messages, and I want to say intentionally so.
I think
But then
so.
the other
Yes.
thing I'm confused is like because again, this came out in 2016. It would have been like, in production probably 2014, 2015 ish. So like, yeah, still pretty early on in terms of like trans acceptance
Yeah.
in America. And so, but then again, like Donald Glover he's a pretty, to my knowledge, he's like a pretty progressive guy. And like in episode 2 of this season, he has that line where he says like, sexuality is really a spectrum or whatever. So I'm inclined to think that like Donald Glover and presumably the rest of the cast of Atlanta is kind of tackling this show with like a, just kind of accept people and like be nice to them,
Yeah.
or like treat everybody as a valid human being, regardless of whether or not you really understand where they're coming from. I feel like that's kind of the approach they're coming at this
Yeah.
with.
I think it's
Um,
purposely, ambiguous as far as
yeah, as
Paperboy's
a lot of things in
character.
the show is.
Paperboy's character. You're in general, you're meant to root for him. He's kind of,
Mm,
even though he's got flaws, he smokes a lot of weed. He drops a
yeah,
lot
I
of
mean, that's not
vulgar language.
necessarily a flaw.
Well, he's he's pretty insensitive. So so I mean, for for him to sort of admit that, like, I just found out they exist. I mean, you can accept that, but then Franklin goes on to quote other offensive Paperboy lyrics, and Paperboy just sort of dismisses it and said, "Man, I was just rapping. I've said worse
Mm.
things." And his body language, I don't know if you notice this, but Paperboy is like leaning way over in his chair, like he's trying to distance himself from Franklin, and
I
Franklin.
mean, he does that a lot. I feel like
Yeah,
I get what you're talking about.
I don't know if he's posing as some rapper or
Nah, he's being completely genuine.
his character.
He's yeah, the
Yeah,
like the only thing the only th- I think that the only thing he's being ingenuine. I mean, he's like cursing on live TV, and they
yeah,
have to like bleep it out. Like uh the only thing that he's like being in I think the only thing he's being like insincere about in this episode is like the degree, like he's kind of reeling, or maybe not reeling himself back, but he's kind of like editing his own dialogue to be more clear to the demographic of people who he's talking to. Obviously, like when he's on Twitter, or if he's talking to Darius or somebody else, he's probably gonna assume that they're on the same page as him in a lot of situations, so he wouldn't feel he wouldn't feel the need to explain when he says like, man, I Caitlyn Jenner looks weird.
yeah,
Like he would like let that slide. But in these circles, they like, he knows that that's going to give people pause, and so he's going to be more careful about like the wording that he uses. I think that's the only like way that you could say he's like being insincere. But I mean, everybody talks
yeah.
different depending on who
I
you're
wouldn't say
talking to. So yeah.
insincere, but ignorant is, I think, not. I mean, I think in the appropriate or the accurate sense of that word, he is ignorant, right? He doesn't really know too much about this stuff. So anyway, so Franklin then turns to this Deborah Holt woman, and he asks what she thinks, quote, about all this. It's not he doesn't really phrase a question to her, but he lets Deborah speak, and Deborah has some sort of non-specific explanations, which seems to be just addressing transphobia, and whether it's a natural outcome of a culture of quote exclusion and power and conflicts of interest. So she's kind of, it's a little bit of psychobabble as far as I can tell. And
I
but
mean, that was the really interesting thing that I was thinking about writing it down, but I noticed that like maybe this was just me having a massive vocabulary, but I understood perfectly everything she was saying.
Oh, you did.
Uh, yeah, like I mean, I know what all the words she was
Oh,
saying
I know
were,
what the words are, but they're
and she
just
put them in an
loose.
order that chained adjectives together and stuff, and I like I understood. I think what she was getting at, like, I think that it's indicative. Like, I think this is a
You've
character that
made
they're
the
trying to
connection
present.
between transphobia and exclusion and power.
Well, I mean, if by made the connection you mean I understood that that's what she was saying to me, the audience, then yeah, I made the connection.
How
But
about
like, I think,
conflicts of interest? What conflicts of interest are we talking about in the? She's specifically talking about the black community having some sort of
yeah,
conflict of interest with trans
I think
people.
that, oh yeah, yeah, like I think what she's referring to is like what she kind of describes. She doesn't get the chance to fully go into depth about, but when she talks about uh, how like a masculinity issue where, in this case, like if I were to finish her thought, I would assume that where she was going is that Paperboy being a rapper who raps about getting hoes and stuff, and also tweets about not wanting to fuck Caitlyn Jenner would be a like a what's the word, conflict of, I mean, she says conflict of interest, but it's like a hypocrisy, or like he's via what he's saying on Twitter and then what he's saying in his songs is like seeming to draw a distinction between Caitlyn Jenner and like other women, which she would be pointing out as like transphobic, but also that his demeanor gives off an impression that like he thinks that wanting to sleep with like a transgender woman would like be non-masculine of him, as well as earlier, if I'm extrapolating from what the show says, we had an entire like subplot of an episode about the jail episode where the guy was very very defensive about his girlfriend who appeared to be a trans woman, and how that didn't make him gay,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
stuff. So I would assume that where she was
Well,
going, or
I think we're just introduced to this woman. The creators are just trying to introduce this woman as an academic, and she's speaking with sort of
well, yeah,
academic
yeah, and
language.
I think the show, like the main purpose of that is just to like introduce a character who is academic, like knows what words mean. However, and it's like I understand everything she's talking about. And I think that it's like a reasonable premise to like build an argument across. However, she then immediately starts completely fumbling when she just demonstrates her complete lack of like awareness of what the community who she's talking to like actually behaves like, or she's just totally out of touch with the African American community. Like it's all just perfectly encapsulated in how she says Mr. Paperboy.
Well,
And and
she
and
does.
Al is just like, yeah, Mr. Paperboy. Call me Mr. He's just like, yeah, Mr. Paperboy. That's correct, totally. And it's just like perfect. She's just like does not understand what he's about, or like they're just not on the same page,
Well, she does. She does draw. Or she
at
comments
this point in the episode.
that there are new ideas about gender that have not reached all people, and this does seem to be sort of an olive branch to Paperboy, like because he just admitted he's ignorant about trans people, and she's restating this that the word is just getting out, but her dialogue is obscured by Paperboy laughing like over top of her dialogue, and when she specifically points to the masculinity and identity issues in the rap community, then Paperboy gets defensive. But she quotes more lyrics of his and says she tries to sort of uh, um, turn it into some sort of analysis about there being pro-sexual spectrum interpretations in his lyrics, and that there's a layer of fluidity. And this just this just rubs Paperboy the wrong way. He disagrees with that. He says, "I don't think about what I'm rapping half the time." again, again here, I think I think he's admitting his ignorance again, which it's consistent with what he said before, but again, it's kind of like drawing the contrast between the academic and the rapper who
Well,
really isn't
yeah, yeah.
educated about any of this.
Yeah. I mean, the way I wouldn't the way you're kind of talking about it, I think kind of implies that like the academic is like knows all, and Paperboy is just like ignorant and he needs to be educated. But I think it goes both ways. I think that the fact that like I was saying, how she she calls him Mr. Paperboy, and she tries to analyze a rap lyric where if you've ever heard any rap lyrics, you would know that that's not what he's talking about. She like the lyric she brings up is like, if you F with me, you my N-word for life. And she's like, oh yeah, that means that like
Yeah,
you
that's
you
misinterpreted.
would consider sleeping with your male friends, which is like demonstrates that she just has never listened to a rap song in her entire life. And like if you want to have a dialogue with with like a I guess I'll say the hip hop community or whatever, then you gotta, if you want to have a dialogue with any demographic of people, you have to be willing to meet them halfway. And she, whether like knowingly or otherwise, is not meeting him halfway at all. At least at this point in the, or
Yeah,
like I'd say like in this episode, I don't think that either Paperboy or I forget her name, but the head of
Deborah.
like Deborah, yeah. I don't think that Al or Deborah really like come to like meet each other halfway. Really, they just kind of like by the end of the episode end up like agreeing to disagree, or like realizing that that they're not so different after all. I
Well, they
guess
will
you
ultimately
can,
agree on one point, but we'll come to
yeah,
that.
yeah.
I mean that. So
They
yeah,
agree on the
I
fundamentals.
actually um, I didn't feel any connection with this Deborah woman, um, because she
Like you
came
don't
across.
connect with her, or you didn't think that she was.
No, I think they were presenting her as sort of a little bit arrogant and trying to graft these these uh, these theses of whatever she wrote in her book, trying to graft this onto Paperboy somehow. And I mean, she says, this is quoted too: "Black men aren't ready to accept the implications of a trans accepting culture," and and that's kind of like where the conversation ends before they go to commercial, the first commercial. But so I mean, she's kind of snooty, she kind of, there's a couple little quick shots of her sort of looking sideways at Paperboy. So as a viewer, you're kind of, I think you're meant to see her as a little bit snooty at this point. But
Yeah.
let's move on. So like, so we go to the first commercial, which this at this point, the first time I watched this, it did kind of strike me. Well, the commercial starts off with a guy pulling a 16-ounce can of Arizona iced tea out of a cooler, taking it to the register, and then he has a discussion with the checkout clerk about the price of the can.
A discussion, yeah.
He's upset that the price is like $1.49 when on the can it says 99 cents. And like, this was weird. Like, this is where I was like, wait a minute, is this part of the episode? It must be, because this was not a favorable view of the product that was being advertised. Right, the guy's saying this is supposed to be 99 cents, but it says,
Is Arizona iced tea a real thing?
yes, it is. And I
Okay.
did my homework. I researched this, and it
Yeah, I
turned.
remember you talking about this episode at an earlier date, and you were wondering like whether the companies that were being included, that were having these ads within the episode being made about them, were like paying Atlanta to be there, or if Atlanta was paying liberties to them
Yes,
to get their products into the show.
because it did not seem like a favorable spot. Like,
Yeah.
so
I assume
I
that's
looked
what
up
you
some
researched.
stuff on Arizona iced tea, and it turns out that the owner or the founder of this company, uh, and I guess just the company at the level of the marketing or at management, they promised to keep the price of their 16-ounce iced tea at 99 cents. And there was a viral
Oh.
video that was released like a couple years ago that showed what appeared to be a can that had the price of $1.29 on it. And
Hmm.
this became a viral video, and people got upset, like they were going back on their promise to keep the can at 99 cents. But it turned out that was actually a Canadian can, like the $1.29 label was in reference to Canadian dollars. So I think that's what they're alluding to in this commercial. It's not clear like when this commercial was made, because again, it made me wonder like what the timing was when this commercial was actually made. But it also made me wonder like, I'm not aware of Arizona iced tea being like popular in the black community. It's more associated with like skateboarders and like young white kids. I think I may be wrong about that. Audience can
I know nothing about. I mean, I had never heard of Arizona
but
white tea
interestingly
before.
enough, I also ran across some old, like going back to 2008. This company Arizona actually was forced to change the label on one of its products because it had an image showing antebellum, like a plantation, like what appeared to be the face of a building that might have been a plantation, and it wasn't clear if basically somebody was claiming that this was a racist image. I saw the image. It's pretty low resolution, sort of nondescript, but anyway, there is that in the history of this company as well. So that kind of like made me wonder, like, okay, what is the connection between this Arizona company and Atlanta? And I'm gonna come back to that in a moment, because the next commercial was another more obvious spoof on the blacks, on the stereotype of blacks drinking malt liquor. And I don't know if you're old enough to remember the history of malt liquor, but
nope.
Again, this is homework.
Not only am I probably not old enough, but I know nothing about alcohol.
So malt liquor is basically higher alcohol content beer. I mean, it is beer. It's just got more alcohol in it, and there's a way that they can brew it to have like 5.5 or 6% alcohol. So it was originally marketed to the white community in the suburbs in the late 50s and 60s is when it was first put out there.
Is this like information you hunted down?
Yeah. Okay. But it never caught on. But like it slowly caught on in the poorer neighborhoods and black communities because of the higher alcohol content.
Oh.
Or actually, I don't know if that's why or not. If it was what the reason. That's what the stereotype is, or that's what the the stereotype of somebody walking around with a paper bag and a 40-ounce Mickey's malt liquor beer. So this spoof commercial is a black man in a tuxedo ordering malt liquor at a bar, and the bartender pouring it into champagne glasses, and this guy sort of whisks away to a beautiful woman who's waiting for him, and they end up drinking Mickey's malt liquor out of champagne glasses. And the tagline at the end of the commercial is, "You're drinking it wrong. Mickey's fine malt liquor. You're drinking it wrong." So this is just, like I said, this is a spoof on the stereotype of blacks drinking malt liquor. So the link here in this was really interesting. The research I did uncovered a link between these two products, the Arizona iced tea and the malt liquor. There's the guy that founded the Arizona company got his start distributing malt liquor in New York City. So my theory, and this is kind of meta analysis, is that
bring it on.
Whoever got permission to spoof Arizona iced tea must have been in contact with the founders of the same two companies, this malt liquor company and the Arizona company. There's some connection there that they must have been in contact and said, "Hey, we want to do these spoof commercials and put them on Atlanta podcast." So there is a loose connection there. I'd be very interested to know if anybody
That's
thinks
crazy.
that's a real connection. The guy's name is Don Voltaggio. That's the founder of Arizona. So there you go, some deep analysis on the spoof commercials. All right, so back to I left you speechless. Is that
Yeah.
it? That's my goal here. All right, so we're going back to Montague, the talk show, and when we go back, we are told by Franklin that he's going to send the camera feed to a roving correspondent, somebody named Nathan, who introduces Harrison, a black man with
Oh.
dreadlocks who claims to have racial identity. Harrison, formerly Antoine Smalls, identifies as a 35-year-old white man. We see footage of Harrison on the golf course wearing a collared shirt and then at a farmer's market carrying some sort of vegetables. He offers little in the way of explanation as to why he thinks he's white, but he's clearly acting white. He claims to be a systems engineer for Coca-Cola, and he later claims he also works at the Stonecrest Mall, which I don't know where that's supposed to be, but um, after this initial interview, we get the mother, Antoine's mother, or I'll call him Harrison. Harrison's mother, uh, she just flat out says that he's lying. Basically, that he doesn't have a
Hmm.
job at Coca Cola. He's a student with no job, and she doesn't. She just rejects his claim that he's white, and he
Hmm.
says he. Uh, so then then they go back to interviewing Harrison as they're walking down the street, and he's basically saying that race is just a made up thing, and that uh, his mother's generation grew up having labels, and quote, I'm just not like that. He says he expresses his identity by quote, dressing a certain way, uh, meaning like, and then he mentions Patagonia, which I guess is supposed to be
Yeah.
a white stereotype clothing outlet. And he says, I wear a thick brown belt. And then we see Harrison looking into a mirror and apparently imitating a white person ordering an IPA beer and discussing Game of Thrones. this, I got to admit, I laughed pretty hard at this. I thought it was
Yeah.
pretty well done, pretty good. I don't know if
I
you,
thought the golf thing was really funny.
yeah,
Cause I you know
that's
that
totally
we I mean
me.
we've gone golfing
Yeah, yeah,
together, but yeah, like me and my white friends,
that's what we
we
look
like
like.
got into golfing like a year or so ago, and it was just really funny being called out.
It did actually make me do a double take at one point, thinking, wait a minute, is this evidence of my white privilege? The fact that I can laugh at somebody making fun of white people, you know, like what if Donald Glover, you know, what if Donald Glover was white and he was making fun of like a black stereotype, you know,
Yeah,
which he
that's a
does.
I mean that's a conversation that's been had since like people started calling things out as being racist.
Yeah, but I mean, this is I think this is part of the conversation that uh, goes on in the talk show too about freedom of speech and the use of language and how some people are offended by some things.
Yeah, yeah. And like I'll say that, when Paperboy is talking about how like, oh, I was just rapping and stuff, like I think and I think that like what's really important about this episode is like kind of what it is like what it's saying, trying to decipher and decode what message it's trying to send to the audience, which ultimately I think is like kind of whatever you want to take out of it, because it's just meant to get you thinking about this stuff. But I will say that I like am the kind of person who like I fully support Paperboy, like the ability for someone like Al as Paperboy to like write whatever lyrics they want and that kind of thing. But then of course like you know, you have to deal with the consequences of if people don't like what you say, you either need to, you know, convince them that you didn't mean what they think you said, or you need to, you know, say something else, stop using the words that people don't like, or you need to just be okay with the fact that some people are going to be mad at you. And, you know, Paperboy is kind of picking like the last option, where he's just saying, you know, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, and you know, some people might not like it, but they're not my audience. And I get, you know, and he's also trying to like clear up that like he's not, because you know, he actually especially with how the Montague guy really tries to kind of twist his words into being transphobic. Al does manage to clear up that he, you know, he is not disgusted by Caitlyn Jenner or whatever. He's not like trying to say that anybody's rights should be taken away. He's just saying that she's not that important to me, and that, like, you know, what's the big deal of calling someone weird, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, I will say, you know, there is more nuanced discussion to be had about, like, you know, in this case, I guess, like a high profile. It's still not, to me, I never really got the sense of just how famous is Al. But either way, I think you know, he's meant to be just like any kind of B-list celebrity, I think. But you know, there's more nuanced discussion to be had about what the cultural impacts of like a celebrity who has a reach, like stating their opinions about like another group of people, because you know, you can pretty easily, like, even just calling a group of people weird, or a certain type of person who is the figurehead for a group of people weird, you know, that can have consequences. You know, that can kind of sway cultural opinion, or at least the opinion of your audience. But in terms of, you know, how much you want to think of Paperboy as like responsible for that is, you know, up to the individual. But I generally would say, like, yeah, he's more or less doing the best he can. And
well, I mean, so going back to this little segment where Harrison is acting white, I mean, I totally laughed, like, and I don't see, I mean, I think it's legitimately funny, like, to see black people imitating white people.
Yeah, like, I think this episode is one of, if not the funniest in the entire series. Yeah. Like, for free. I think Donald Glover actually won like a like directorial award of some kind for like best comedy series or something, and it was credited to this episode or something like that. He won an award for directing this episode, and it's like a comedy episode, basically.
So we also have to point out here that Harrison, I mean, they've clearly pointed to like something about this Harrison guy, that something's a little off, right? I mean, he's obviously, I mean,
I don't think they're like, I don't think they're trying to say that like something's off about him. I think they're trying to, well, like, you know,
I mean, he lied.
And again, it's really hard to, yeah, obviously he's a punchline, but like, it's like really hard to decipher, you know, what the show is, like what was going on in their heads when they were making these scenes, because every single joke that's made about Harrison is like a linking it to transgender jokes. It's a let's take, you know, the things that transgender people say and apply that to the idea of transracialism. And I don't know if that woman who's kind of like the spearhead for the transracialism identity movement had like, I think that was in like 2015-ish, something like that. I can't remember her name. I might look that up. But there's this, I mean, I guess born and assigned like white at birth. You know, her ethnic heritage is like all from around Europe, and she identifies as African American, and she like does her hair in traditionally more African American style. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I have a note here about her. I mean, there's a whole Wikipedia page about her. I mean, I think this Harrison character is loosely pointing at that Rachel Dolezal incident.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of impossible not to, because she's like the only high-profile transracial identifying indivial that
there's been
exists.
Others. I mean, but
there's others, but she's the big one.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe just for the audience, I don't know. Do you think everybody knows who that is? So she was a former college instructor and activist known for presenting herself as a black woman despite having been born to white parents. But what was so significant about this woman was that she was not only falsely claiming black ancestry, but she used that to get a position as the chapter president for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and NAACP chapter president in Spokane, Washington. So she actually used a false identity to obtain a position within the NAACP, and ultimately her parents came out and basically spilled the beans and said she's just posing, she's not black at all. And she ended up getting fired from her job. She was also a professor at a university out in the West Coast somewhere, and she ended up losing her job because she had, I guess, committed some other lies. And I'm looking at the Wikipedia post now. She's, pattern of misconduct. She ended up getting fired. So that, this Harrison character is kind of like the reverse analogy to Rachel Dolezal. This is a black guy who's claiming to be white.
And there's like a lot of layers going on here because, on the one hand, it's a born of black parents, I guess, individual identifying as white, which is then being linked like through the show, like it's obviously a link to transgenderism, and as I kind of established earlier, like I feel like Donald Glover is pretty accepting of trans people, and Paperboy, as displayed in this episode, seems to be, while ignorant of them, he seems to be pretty accepting of transgender people as well. But then, like the jokes that are made about Harrison are all like at his own expense, which then, linking, the way he says like, oh, I dress in certain ways. I try to imagine myself post-surgery, that kind of thing, which is all like it's literally ripped one for one for how like trans people are depicted and stuff. And the other one that like really got me was how like his mom talks about him, where she's saying like beat for beat everything that like it's become really obvious like transphobic parents say about their trans kids, where she's like, oh, he's been like his old name every it was Harrison is his
Antoine
black name, and then Antoine Smalls is his white name.
No, that's his black name, or that's his given name.
Yeah. So she's like, oh, he has been Antoine for years, and then one day, out of the blue, suddenly he says, "Call me Harrison," and then they're like, "Do you believe that he is white?" And she's like, "I mean, he's not. It'd be great if he could be," and all that kind of. It's like those are like
he didn't
exactly.
Say she said it'd be great if I could be Rihanna.
Yeah. She makes the point. So what she's communicating is, it would be great if you could just be whoever you believed yourself to be, but that's not how it works, right? And like these are like beat for beat, like the types of arguments that like we saw a lot of in kind of like the late 2010s that I like to believe are kind of dying out now, that people would say to try and like invalidate transgender people,
But like, I mean, I think the creators are poking fun at the wokeness here, because
it is absolutely poking fun, because like the punchline is clearly still on Harrison. And I'd be like really interested to come back to this episode after like 5 or 10 years to see like how society has changed, because right now in American society, the idea of transracialism is like hilarious, right? It's everybody.
I think you're missing the subtlety that, I mean, what Harrison is rejecting his black identity, and he's clinging to a false identity, right? I mean, he's not white.
I mean,
he's not employed.
I mean, look, I don't think that that's subtle at all, and I would say I agree that
so
it's
the
like
paradox
a false
is,
identity.
How can one reject one identity which is sort of innate in cling, and he you later see the hypocrisy in Harrison too, and we'll come to that. But
Well, right, yeah. Like I think no, I think that that's like a very like I think you can absolutely take that away, but I think what's really interesting about this like because like again it's linked, it's very clearly like a metaphor for transgender people, like
yeah,
just based on the way that they talk. And however, you know, the conclusions that you can draw about transracialism and that are by and large drawn about transracialism, which, you know, I would tend to agree with because I've been raised in the same society as everybody else, which is just the idea that, you know, race is not something that you get to just like choose. You don't get to just like decide to identify as another race. It's something that you're born as, right?
but why
Um,
not?
yeah, but the fact that you know, a very explicit connection is being drawn between transracial identifying people and transgender identifying people is, you know, like the two things can't be the same at one time because, like, you know, as and maybe it was different back in 2016. That's another like layer of like, did they really like, were they actually trying to poke fun at transgender people? I guess like, were they saying, was this episode all about saying that transgender people aren't actually the gender that they claim they are?
I didn't get that. At least I didn't get it overtly. I think
Well, no, yeah, like
it's more
I didn't
about the
get that overtly
identity
either.
politics. It's
I Yeah, like,
it's a larger
well,
scope
transgenderism
argument,
is very identity politics
but
based,
it's
but
not the only thing, right? I mean, there's
no, it's not the
race
only
and there's
thing.
gender and
Right,
I mean, like male,
but like
female, and
right, but like he says, I
black
try to
woman.
identify myself, or I try to imagine myself post surgery. You know, like how can you not make that connection?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. That's the obvious connection.
Yeah, so I'm just
But
saying,
it
like
also fits with like a lot of the things that come up in the previous episodes where like the I'm thinking of the the drug dealers that were at that campsite where they seem to have taken on a Hispanic name, but they were mostly black guys, right? So there was like an identity issue there. Like,
well,
who are
I
these
mean, yeah,
people?
that was those. I think in terms of like decisions made by the cast and crew who are working on the show, I think that that decision was made because the Migos are a real like rap
Mm.
trio, um, and like that is their real name. Now, you know, whether they were like questioning that in real life could be part of it, but I think that that episode was not as much focused on
And then the
that
more
so much.
interpersonal
Um,
analogy is to like Paperboy's identity as a rapper versus who he really is. You know, he's just rapping to make money and make a living, but he's really not like that. So there's like a sort of
Well,
an
yeah, I think
identity
that's
issue
definitely,
built in
yeah, I think the
there.
show
And then
definitely explores that.
Van has all sorts of identity issues. So I mean, it just keeps coming up over and over.
Yeah, no, the idea of like of like who are these characters or like their perceptions of themselves and what they want to be versus you know, where they are at currently, or more specifically how society views them. And this comes up with, you know, with the race question in later episodes of just, and we've kind of touched on it before, is kind of like how do you define with, you know, with the main focal point of this show is like, how do you define blackness, right? You know, is it your genes? Is it, you know, how other people perceive you to be? Is it your like ancestry or your opportunities in life? Is it what you've experienced in your life that's, you know, slightly different from necessarily how people perceive? Like,
Yeah.
there, it's a whole like question that the show explores a lot, and this episode definitely is part of that.
So
But I think in this case,
there's a little segment of a doctor who says, you know, the experimental surgery is quote 100% possible to transition Harrison's
right.
identity, although quote he's going to look weird.
Hmm.
And so like you're like,
Yeah.
okay,
Which is like,
this
again, I was gonna bring that one up, which
directly,
is like, again, like a total pot
yeah,
shot at like transgender
yeah,
people.
yeah,
But like in this case, like it's making the butt of the joke Harrison, which is saying like, oh, this is like, I can totally like, I in fact I actually did before, like today, I actually did watch a couple Dave Chappelle specials, who's, you know, gotten in hot water
oh yeah,
for
yeah. There's some people in
jokes that were
Minnesota that
that, you know, put
boycott.
trans people as kind of the butt of the joke. And again, I defend anybody's, you know, right to make what jokes about whatever they want. Just, you know, you deal with the consequences of whether or not people like that. But anyway, like those are the exact jokes that like Dave was making about trans. Like he does a bit where he's saying like, you know, transgender people, you gotta admit it's pretty hilarious. You know, you're born in a body that you don't feel matches your identity. Wouldn't it be crazy if I was Chinese but born in this black body or whatever? And then he does like a Asian face stereotype and like an accent or whatever. And it's like, you know,
he offended multiple groups with one joke.
Well, I mean, specifically, I'm just saying, like that joke, the conceit behind that joke that he was making is the exact same conceit as, you know, what presumably the comedy behind these jokes in this episode is, which would be, man, transgenderism is so crazy. If you imagine that with anything else, it becomes obvious just how little sense it makes. And then you use like transracialism as the catalyst for explaining like how weird transgenderism is, right? Or you know, how unlogical or how little sense it makes. But then again, you know, like I think that Donald Glover is generally somebody who's pretty accepting of trans people. So it's really difficult to like decipher what was, again, like it's really difficult to decipher what was going on in their heads.
Maybe you shouldn't be giving him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he really is trans.
Maybe, I mean, yeah, it's possible that like, I guess the conclusion that I could come to is that at this point in time, maybe the crew overall, the writers of the show overall, like felt that like trans people are like, you can make fun of them. Like they are like the type of like a demographic that like you can make jokes about, and that's fine and stuff like that. But like at the end of the day, they would be like, you know, oh, we make you the butt of the joke, but like ultimately we're not trying to take your rights away. We're not trying to, you know, invalidate your existence. You guys are we just don't really understand why you guys are the way you are, and we think that's funny, and so we'll make jokes about it, right?
Well,
and you know, I would assume that like that's kind of the closest I could come to like a definitive like maybe this is what was going on in the writers' minds while they were making this episode, but I don't
think it's as targeted specifically at the trans community as it is about the woke community, and actually more specifically,
I think it's targeted both communities in different ways. You know, the woke community is represented by, I think, what was her name? The like leader of Deborah. Yeah, I think like she's the spearhead for the woke community in this case, and like she's, you know, concerned about homophobic comments being made in lyrics and stuff, and you know that exists totally alongside, I think, the parallels to trans people that are made in this episode, transgender people specifically.
So like the next little segment, which
it's not like it's one or the other.
I thought this little clip was pretty funny too. So after the little interview with the doctor, Harrison makes a statement about being the victim of discrimination and ridicule from people who misidentify him, like black people that want to treat him as one of us, and he feels that that's discrimination, and he's been misidentified. But then in the very next shot, which is funny, we see a black man talking to two police officers, and Harrison is standing like on the other end of the car, and he's pointing at him, and he's like, "Yeah, this is definitely the guy. He doesn't even live in this area." Like Harrison has adopted like some sort of stereotypical white racist posture in the very next scene after claiming to be a victim of discrimination himself. So that's what I mean. Like, I think they're poking fun at like this victim culture among people who want to claim an identity and then say they're a victim because of the identity.
I mean, like, I guess I would push back on that because, again, like, you know, if the assertion is there, again, like, and I would assume that the link, which is pretty obvious, is to transgender people, you know, if the intent of this, like, episode is, or, you know, at least that particular scene is like, let's criticize how a lot of trans people claim victimhood even though they don't really have it. Well, A, they do have it. They are victimized in a lot of, like, in laws and in a lot of, like, hate crimes, which are a lot more likely to happen to trans people. Regardless of whether or not they were aware of that kind of thing in 2016, Donald Glover, like, seems like the type to not call that where it's not really applicable, or where he might not know it for sure. And to me, it makes more sense as, like, a scene that's another example of Harrison like trying to adopt white mannerisms, I suppose, which in this case would be like being suspicious of black people as criminals just because they're black, right?
Yeah.
So I think I would take it as the same kind of joke as the "Did you see Game of Thrones last night?" joke, or the golfing joke. Like it's just funny to see a black person like taking on a very white, like traditionally white like mannerisms, right? And just the juxtaposition is, I think, what's funny there. I don't think that particular joke is necessarily like a gotcha for people who claim victimhood because of their identity. You know?
I'm kind of getting ahead of myself because there's another sequence in the Montague talk show that I'll come back to that in a minute. But the interview with Harrison and Nathan ends with Harrison offering advice to other black kids that might want to transition. I think that's the implication. And Harrison says, "Just be you at all costs, but also ... stop dressing so crazy."
Yeah.
Like another sort of comical statement, like inherently paradoxical, or he's basically contradicting himself in one sentence.
Yeah.
So the scene.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of the Harrison jokes are like, I guess I'd say prioritizing being funny over having like a particular message.
Yeah. And the scene ends with this comically long period of nodding.
Yeah. That was another thing. Like
Harrison and
that
Nathan
so
nodding.
perfectly like I literally have never seen that happen in any other TV show ever. They just nod. It's literally out of like a YouTube skit.
It's
like it's so. Oh my gosh, I just love how these are the kinds of scenes that make me feel like the people making this show are in touch.
Yeah.
Like they know what's funny currently, and they're like very tapped in to like what internet culture is like, especially at the time, and even still right now. Like just two characters like talk like an interviewer and like this and this white identifying born black person just talking about how this guy is like encouraging black kids to like be themselves at all costs, and then saying, "Yeah, but stop dressing so crazy." And then they just nod at each other as if like something just so profound was just said. Is just it's just peak internet. There's no words to describe it. It's
irony
just like
as comedy, or comedy as irony. Yeah, irony as comedy.
I mean, yeah, it's not. I mean, it's not just irony, but like you get the idea.
So cut to another spoof commercial, and here we're introduced to Devion Johnson, who's promoting Swisher Sweets cigarillos, which are, quote, made with the highest quality of tobacco from family-owned farms. And we see some shots of like some.
Are these a real cigar?
Yes,
also?
they are.
Yeah.
And they're cheap, and and so like after some glowing recommendations, Devion cuts the wrapper and empties the loose tobacco from the cigar with a big grin on his face. And then we cut to like three other black men. I think some of these individuals are celebrities. I honestly, I didn't have time to look up who they were, but the first guy is definitely recognizable, but we can look it up later. I'm sorry, I don't know their names, but they're each is doing the same thing. They're emptying the tobacco out of the cigar wrapper and using it to roll a joint or a blunt. And so this is another comical spoof. This one directed, I think, again at a black stereotype of the weed smoker. So I don't think there's a whole lot to be said about this other than it's just straight up comedy and spoof. So okay, we're getting long, so let's move it along. Back in the studio with Montague, Paperboy says he doesn't want to speak at all about this trans issue because he's afraid of being canceled. He claims he's being censored. He says, quote, "You can't even say ho in a song no more." Deborah says, "Oh, you're whining." Paperboy says, "Rap is storytelling about the black experience," and he calls Deborah a bitch.
Well, he specifically, like, it's kind of an interesting exchange, because she says, like, she says like, "Oh, you're whining about chickens coming home to roost," and he says like, "Oh, rap music is chickens coming home to roost." Like he's saying
Yeah.
that the way that rap music kind of evolved, and I guess saying that like the hip hop era that like came to be seen as like kind of homophobic and misogynistic and that kind of thing uh, was the result and the evolution of like a culture that had been, I guess, like beaten down, like African Americans who had been like wronged so much historically that
Hmm.
like I get he's kind of saying that like, hey, well, you basically put us into this situation, which like I've heard both sides of the argument that like a lot of the, I guess, like the problematic lyrics and messaging in a lot of in I'd say like past rap music. I think nowadays we're definitely the hip hop community has cracked down, I guess, and gotten a lot more critical of homophobic and misogynistic and now transphobic rhetoric, which is very good. But back in the day, when it was more common and more accepted, and I think I've heard that that kind of culture came about. I've heard people both say that it was kind of just like all like the black people just kind of coming up with it themselves, and white people didn't really have anything to do with it, and also that it was sort of like the natural evolution, I suppose, of like wider American culture as it already existed, and black people being in like a worse socioeconomic position and kind of like grasping at any what's the word, like image that they could sell to a wider American audience, and the thug would just happen to be like a really successful one, so like it's like you can't fully pin it on them. And I haven't listened to enough music from that period, and I wasn't even alive back then, so I can't really say
Well, there's
myself.
definitely a defiant aspect to it,
Yeah.
and there was uh, an uber masculine quality to it as well, and
Yeah, I definitely get that impression. I
I mean
believe
that
that.
that part. I mean the defiant sort of rebellious, even the vulgarity as a means of shocking, people. That's, I guess, somewhat understandable coming from somebody who might feel like oppressed or disadvantaged or disenfranchised. But yeah, I don't know about the like directing vulgarity towards women, or that kind of like what might be perceived as advocating violence. Hatred towards the police is certainly was a thing. Um, so
I think it's still a
yeah,
thing,
yeah. So I mean,
and
it it's a
kind
we.
of
I don't know if we're
justifiably
supposed
so.
to. I don't know if we're supposed to side with Paperboy in this little exchange or not. But I mean, he's sort of
I
like
don't think there's necessarily
hostile
this.
towards
Yeah, like I don't
Trevor.
think this necessarily is like a pick someone's side kind of situation. It's more so like a how it's like a how do we move forward from here? Like we're already kind of in the situation that we're in, and like there's kind of a lot of, and I think this happens in real life too, is there's kind of a lot of like debate over like, oh, whose fault is it that we're in the situation we were in, or that or that like I guess hip hop music ended up the way, or like had that era of kind of being misogynistic and homophobic and stuff. But I think what's more important and what people should focus on more now is just like kind of ridiculing the babies of the world and praising the Kendrick Lamars, and I think that's like happening,
Well, I
which is
mean,
nice.
Paperboy's character. I mean, he's trying to. He's making the argument like the two wrong. He's making the two wrongs make a right argument. Like he's saying, well, I've been
I don't
I've
think.
been victimized, so I should be allowed to use
Yeah,
profanity.
I
That's
can
kind of at face value.
I
That's
mean,
what
I
it
can
looks
I
like.
can see that because but like the other thing is that he also makes the point where like Montague says like, oh, but your music is detrimental to black teens, and he says like, yeah, well, all music is
Right.
detrimental to black teens. Like he's aware, and he's also experienced this. I think this is also an instance of him, like of his actual character. I don't think it's just pure like a real life social commentary, because Paperboy has seen children imitating him in like holding up like water guns
And
or
it
toy
bothered
guns
him.
or whatever, and he obviously does not like that at all.
Yeah.
he doesn't want to be having that kind of effect on, black culture. He's very concerned about that. And so in this case, when he's saying like, well, all rap music is damaging to teens, I think he's not trying to excuse himself or say, yeah, we shouldn't do anything about that, or saying that it's okay. I think he's just trying to conjure empathy for his own situation, where he's trying to say like, yeah, I'm kind of participating in this culture that is detrimental to black teens or whatever, but I feel that I'm being overly prosecuted or overly antagonized for my role in that because I really didn't have many other options.
So what segment of the viewership of Atlanta do you think would sympathize with that argument? Because I don't.
I mean, hopefully everybody
well,
could see.
I mean,
could conjure some sympathy in their soul.
Oh, some
for that.
Well, I mean, I just think it's a weak argument. I mean, Montague he's an odd character too, but he tries to connect Paperboy's lack of father in the transphobia issue. Paperboy calls Montague the N-word. He says it's hard for him to care about the trans issue when no one cares about him as a black human, man.
This is hilarious. This actually moment is hilarious because he says like N-word what? Like to Montague.
You can see Montague's just taken aback. Like
just the reaction that Montague has to that. He's like, whoa, what? He like straightens his tie and stuff, like readjusts himself in his chair, which is like hilarious, but it's also like he's a black man, he's certainly heard there's no way he hadn't heard the word before.
Well, it makes him out to be like a white guy, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. Like I think that that little bit right there immediately paints the picture of like a guy who like he's fully integrated himself into like white culture, presumably in order to become successful as he, has now that he's like a TV network. And as a result, he's now like he's running the Black American network, right?
Yeah.
But like he's misinterpreting everything that that Paperboy is saying in his lyrics, and he's trying to make him out to be like a racist, homophobe, or not racist, but like a misogynistic, transphobic guy, and like he's not having any empathy for like the situation that Paperboy, who the situation that he's in, is very much like influenced by his race, and like but Montague just doesn't see any of that, even though he is a black man as well, which like is something that I think like is a entertaining thing that people say it's like selling out, selling your blackness to become successful, and that's very much looked down upon.
But I mean, like
the Candace Owens of the world. But
if you try to if you try to actually address the actual argument that Paperboy's making, I think it's a lame one. I mean, he's basically saying I've been mistreated, so it's okay for me to speak, in these derogatory terms about this other.
I mean, I don't mean to say that I think this show that like I think he should be fully pardoned again. Like I think in a lot of like back in the Nobody Beats the Biebs episode, like I think I mentioned this where his actions and his attitudes towards Black Justin Bieber were not like fully like they were understandable, but like the actions that he took against him were not justified, that kind of thing. Like I don't think it's a one or the other. I don't think that like we're meant to come away thinking that Al is completely pardoned of like, oh, he's allowed to just keep doing whatever he wants. Like ideally, now that he's kind of heard this advice and seen the effect that it can have on youth, he'll start to like think more about how his lyrics could be construed in a lot of ways, and he'll start to change that. But it's like give him a chance to change before you prosecute him or before you totally antagonize him. I think like that's what he's having a different conversation than what they're saying. They're saying like you have done bad things, and he's saying like, yeah, but that doesn't make me a bad person, right? Like he's not saying I should be allowed to continue doing bad things. I think necessarily he's not trying to like apologize or like justify necessarily what he's done, but he's trying to like again like conjure sympathy and like have people not see him as like a bad person for having said lyrics, I guess, that can send a negative message towards black youth, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to make the point about like the victim culture before, and I think this is kind of where I meant to phrase it, because this is kind of the victim Olympics argument where you have different groups, both of whom are minorities or victims in some way. And in this case, they're actually clashing, right? So who's the bigger victim? Does being black trump being trans? I mean, that that's kind of
Yeah.
Paperboy's argument is divisive, right? He's
Yeah.
not trying to bring any two groups together. Deborah, on the
Well,
other
I mean,
hand,
to be fair, I don't think Deborah is necessarily trying to bring two groups
well,
together.
she tries to connect the plight
Or I
of
mean,
the
maybe she is,
trans
but she's
to.
failing spectacularly at, or in real life, she would be failing spectacularly at doing
Well, I
so.
don't know. I mean, because I've heard this argument before, right? I mean, she's trying to
How
say
often
that
have you heard it succeed in convincing the other side?
the plight of the trans person is similar to the plight of the black man. She's making the civil liberties struggle for equality argument, right? And this to me, I don't know how realistic it is, or how accurate it is to do those. There's obviously differences between those two groups and what each has experienced, but at least it's a attempt to like bring two groups together, right? I'm
Yeah, no,
not
and
saying that I
I
agree
think
with
that
Deborah,
that's,
and I don't even like that her character at all. But like
no, I
we
agree. I
see,
think
I
that
think we
should be done.
see
And I
like
think that,
the opposing arguments here, how uh, you know, this is like where the rubber meets the road in terms of like social implications, and how
yeah,
identity politics ultimately, in my opinion, it ultimately is destructive for everyone, right? Because you
I mean,
start subdividing people into
I don't
victim
really like,
groups, and it all breaks down.
I haven't really like, delved too deep into like identity politics. I mean, I'm sure it would make a perfect sense if somebody were to like explain all the nuances of it to me. But I generally like, based on what's said in this episode, I would agree that with like that the way forward is kind of like what Deborah's saying, that there should be more unity in terms of like recognizing that a lot of the systems that oppress black people are coming from the same root cause as the systems that oppress like women and transgender people and that kind of thing, and you can solve all of those problems at once, or I mean not at completely at once, but like you can tackle a lot of the same root causes and it'll have benefits to everybody. And I think that um, forces that are in favor of like maintaining the hierarchy that we currently have, or that are ambivalent towards it and just care about their own personal gain, which in this case I think absolutely is Montague and like the rest of the media, who are completely willing to antagonize anybody. And we've seen it before in this show, like the media wanting to paint Paperboy as a thug rapper and just saying like, hey, stay in your lane. I think that like those forces in the show and in real life are actively preventing change from happening. And these are the kinds of forces that want to pit like minorities against each other. They try to paint like the like feminism as like, oh well, if you're for feminism then you must be against like BLM, right? Or like the really popular one right now is like, oh, if you're for trans people then you're against like women, right? uh
Right. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Like when you get into this victim Olympics thing, and you start, you eventually these victim groups start running into each other with conflicts, and then you have to start finding like a way to resolve the conflict, and like who's right. Is a, is the black rapper entitled to his free speech to make fun of trans people, or should he be censored? I mean, that's the
mhm.
specific thing here.
Yeah. And
Or
I come to the same, and this is why I really like this episode, is because like I come to the same conclusion that it seems to, which is, yeah, he should be allowed to, like, freedom of speech and shit, but yeah, he's gonna have to accept the consequences, that people are gonna be angry at him.
yeah,
And ultimately speaking, like I think that the big takeaway with this is that you shouldn't like, criticism of Paperboy's lyrics is totally fair, right? But you shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater and call him like a terrible person and stuff, because you need to understand why he's saying those things, and the reasons why a lot of the time come down to like that he's he's putting on a persona that is successful in the current system that he's in, and he's just trying to make his money. And like, you know, I mean, we've been thinking about that kind of thing with this show, where we're thinking about like, oh, what kind of inflammatory titles and thumbnails can we make to like make this show more attractive and gain more eyeballs, even if it's like, you know, like kind of gaming the system. It's like, well, that's kind of our way of trying to like make the best out of the situation that we're in, right? Does that make us like worse people? I would argue, you know, not necessarily, but is it change that could be made in the greater system that we exist in? It's definitely something to focus on, you know? So I think in this case, yeah, like Paperboy himself shouldn't be thought of as like a terrible person, but you know, he could be like, you know, having a better effect on the culture that he has influence over.
His character,
like, that's
does
fair criticism.
They do actually give him some redemption, because his Paperboy says that he does have tolerance for gay people and trans people. So this, you know, but then he just immediately says, but where's the tolerance for people like me? I should be able to say something that's weird. I ain't never said anything about taking people's rights away. And then Deborah has says something, and he's like, yeah, freedom of speech. And
she says, yeah, but people are offended by what you said.
And then Deborah actually like sort of pauses and says, yeah, I agree. And so you're right.
No, like Paperboy his point is that is saying, you know, why shouldn't I be allowed to say that something's weird? You know, why should I have to face any consequences? And the reason why, in essence, is because it offends people, which is a real thing. You know, like like if given the choice to offend people or not to offend people, like who would just choose to offend people for no reason, right? Like, obviously, what Al is getting out of the equation, out of you know, saying ho in his songs and being like they bring up a lyric where he says like, oh, I'd reverse Caitlyn Jenner or something, like make her go back or anything like that.
Like he was that like potent of a lover or something.
Or, I don't know. But I think that, oh man, I've lost my train of thought.
Well,
I think that what this episode is kind of getting at in that sense is that, like, again, it's not necessarily, or the divide between the two groups is that, like, Paperboy is kind of trying to defend his righteousness as a person, and and freedom of speech, and he should be allowed to like say whatever he wants as anybody in the country.
Yeah, and I think
should be allowed to.
the creators are coming down on the side of freedom of speech here, and
pretty explicitly.
Yeah. Even though, you know, like Paperboy, but really again, still should be criticized for like what. I mean, you can certainly sympathize with him from what we know about him, you know, already, that this is how he's making his living, but he's doing it in a way that's sort of demeaning other people. So I think
exactly. So there is criticism to be made, and he can and he can, you know, do his best to like have a better effect on the culture surrounding him. And you know, that would make him an even better person, you know, but he's not necessarily like he shouldn't necessarily be like prevented from succeeding in the future because he's, you know, not trying to change the culture enough or that kind of thing. Like, I think ultimately, it really, like, stories like these really ultimately come to, it feels kind of weird to just like boil them down to some people, like, people aren't just good or evil, they're like a gray area, you know, but like really that's really what all of this boils down to, and what, you know, people have constantly needed to be teaching their kids as like the internet becomes more and more of a thing, is just that like people, like some people have done bad things in the past, some people continue to have kind of problematic elements about them. You know, there are no true heroes, everybody has skeletons in their closet. And like, you know, you can say bad things and still be a good person, or, you know, it's not, you aren't even necessarily a good person. Everybody just like has good and bad attributes, and you shouldn't think of people as heroes and villains, you know? It's just like,
okay, that's pretty squishy, but I'll accept it.
Well, I feel like that's kind of the only conclusion you can come to, because it's just like real life.
All right, well, we got to go on, because I can't stop this podcast without talking about the next commercial. Ahmad White. This is the this is the
Yes.
ghost-like guy who showed up on the bus
Yes.
talking
I was going
to
to say, I didn't notice until I
Ern.
rewatched, but this is the same guy that shows up on the bus. And he
I
says,
love this commercial.
like, come by our, what's the word he uses? Like, our cathedral or some shit like that. Our liberty, our, I don't know, our library? I don't know. He says, like, come to our whatever, and we'll give you a free Nutella sandwich and juice. And everybody's like, and everybody in the commercial is like, yeah, I was so lost. And then I had this Nutella and juice, and I got the answers that I needed. And like,
He's
and now
offering
I'm
like
just like,
like whatever he offers at the beginning of the commercial is like none of it makes any sense together. Like it's like
yeah, no. The one lady says, like, we determined that I wasn't getting enough crystal in my diet.
yeah.
Gold.
Yeah.
And also the absolute like shit editing
Yeah.
is amazing. The bit like where the one guy, like the bigger guy, is like, I got a truck, I got a girlfriend now, I got the answers I deserved. And he like pauses for just a second, and then he inhales as if he's gonna start talking again, and they cut to like another person.
They did it on
Perfect.
purpose.
Like again, like so in tune with like internet culture and internet humor. Like I've literally never seen any other mainstream television show do that kind of joke, and just be like so acutely aware of just like what I guess like my demographic finds funny. It's amazing.
So I found that
they're
found
definitely
this
drugging people with the
purely
Nutella.
humorous. I don't think this has any other racial connotations or anything. But yeah,
I don't know.
the commercial ends with Ahmad saying, "If you'd like to be as smart as a baby dolphin, call now."
Yeah.
What does that mean? Smart as a baby dolphin.
Yeah. I want to say, okay, yeah, so like I want to say, now realizing after I rewatched it for the second time, like a couple days ago, now realizing that this Ahmad White, that he's like supposedly a real guy in this world, he must have been trying to drug Ern in episode 1. Like that's the only thing that makes sense. There's something in that Nutella that's making these people open their minds.
That could be it. You could have something there.
But then how did he walk past the camera in episode 1?
And why did he
how did he walk past it without it seeing him? That's the only thing. I don't know. He's a mystery. Incredible.
So we also get a finale on the Dodge Charger storyline. So this is the third little segment of the guy driving around in this Dodge Charger. And here we see a couple gas station attendants explaining that this guy was awarded the Dodge Charger in a divorce settlement. Apparently that's all he got, and he's been driving around town, and he gets out of the car to fill his car with gas, and he's naked from the waist down, and he looks like he's very nervous or agitated or on meth or something because he's hopping around with no pants on.
Well, he's been driving around. That car is a high.
I guess. But yeah, like again, I had the same question. Like, did somebody clear this with Dodge? You know, to get
they had to have. There's no way they couldn't have.
because the gas station attendants are like looking at this guy like he's crazy, but then the one guy is like, "Well, nice car though." Like,
yeah. Despite all of that, nice car though.
Nice car though. So that was comical as well, and then the final commercial, and this is a head scratcher too. This is a really weird premonition maybe of the George Floyd incident, because
I was gonna say, I don't know what you mean a head scratcher. It seems pretty clear to me.
But wasn't this was 2016, right? When was the George Floyd thing? Well, it wasn't that long ago. So how
2020.
Okay, so do you think they inserted this after the fact, or?
It's almost like African Americans have historically been disproportionately brutalized by police, and this episode was made back in 2016 saying, hey, this happens to black people.
So you think it was done
they were just right. They were just right. And all of America saw that, yeah, it absolutely does happen to black people.
So it's a bizarre sequence. Like, I'm not sure what they were going for. I mean, like
I think they were
there's like
just
a
saying
wolf.
police brutality is fucked up.
Yeah, but like I didn't understand the characters.
Which
It's a wolf
characters?
wrapped with mummy bandages, like in
He's
some sort
just
of
a. I
tomb,
mean, that's just a.
and he
Just like
wants.
the mascot, you know.
So I mean, just so the
Like
viewers.
that's that the like it's like, oh, it's a goofy like cartoon mascot, and then that is what's the word, like diametrically opposed in tone
Yeah.
to the police brutality that happens
So,
later in the.
but I mean, I found this to be like way too similar in the sense that like I really wonder if they inserted this after the fact, because there's a scene
there's
where,
no way.
I mean, obviously he's putting his knee on the wolf character's neck at one point.
Yeah,
And
that was a move. That was a move that that police used to be allowed to use that they're not allowed to use
right,
anymore. That
right.
was
I
specifically
understand.
mentioned in the police report. So like, it's. I
Like,
mean, to me, this is not like. I mean, I've never heard of like inserting a scene 4 years after the fact when after like a relevant thing. And
oh,
Donald
they
Glover
do
in
stuff
interviews
like
has
that all the
said,
time.
what?
Edit things in and out of movies. Like
Well, okay, there's no
entire
evidence of that
characters
happening
get
here,
edited
and
out
Donald
when they
Glover
get in
has
trouble.
said, I see no reason to believe that that's what happened here. And Donald Glover has said in interviews that with Atlanta, people have been like, how did you predict the future? And I said that in a couple episodes ago, I think. And like, this is the scene I was
Oh, so
immediately
you've
thinking
seen
of.
him interviewed on this specific?
Not on this specific
Oh,
scene, but in like an interview where he and the full cast, like the interviewer mentions something about like how the show is like related to real life. And Donald's like, yeah. I mean, a lot of people have been like, how did you predict real life? And that kind of thing.
well, I totally
He
get
just
it.
mentions
I
it
mean,
offhand.
so I mean, it's an open question as to whether this was created before 2016 or. I'm sorry, it's not an open question. It was definitely created before 2016.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I was gonna say, like, I don't see why, like, there's no indication
Actually,
that it would have been made.
I'm still confused because
I mean, if you really find it like that, like that, it would be that unlikely that they made a scene like this before the murder of George Floyd. Like, I guess you can look into it. I mean,
the kid is holding his cell phone out too, which is a direct.
Yeah, Donald Glover depicts that all the time.
Yeah,
he depicted in This Is America. He depicted,
and it seems to me
kids up in the rafters holding their cell phones, like to show the chaos that's happening below. That was 2018. That was before the murder of George Floyd. Like,
I mean, if he really did
a visual shorthand.
If he really did predict that incident with this cartoon segment, then somebody should have like interviewed him on this, and there should be some public statement about it.
But Donald Glover is also but Donald Glover is also the type of person who, like, if you ask him, hey, what's the meaning behind that last like sequence in This Is America, can you explain that? He just goes, no. I think he doesn't want to like explicitly explain what was going on in his head when he was making any of the art that he was making. And I think that this scene is, I think you're like trying to look too far into it. I think it's literally just that police brutality, like, is a really common thing for black men, and like the writers and the animators or whoever, were putting together this sequence, this Coco's Crunchos or Coconut Crunchos like advertisement. We're just saying, hey, this is like, I think they were making a joke where they were saying, like, what if we were to take a like children's commercial, but then contrast it with the harsh reality that that black people are disproportionately brutalized by police in America, and that would be the joke. But then the thing is, the fact, like, with 2020 and beyond perspective that we now have, I think it becomes really obvious that they were just depicting what they knew to be commonplace in America. And, now, past 2020, like, a lot of white audiences have just realized that they were right all along.
I just Googled it. Did Donald Glover predict George Floyd death? There's one clip here. The cartoon, an ad for the fictional Coconut Cruncho cereal, features cartoon children exploring what looks like a tomb with a police officer. The group encounters a wolf, the Wally. I don't understand that, but three children. The three children get the bowls of cereal as Wally bursts out of his sarcophagus.
You don't have to read the whole like transcript.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Does it? Was it made in 2016 or 2020?
The commercial continues.
Is there any indication that it was made after 2020? Because
the
if it
in-episode
was,
commercial
that
made waves in 2016 when it first aired. During an
it was made in
episode
2016,
in which the show's main character appeared on a fictional cable news show. The cereal commercial was among the fake ads that played during the episode.
Yeah, it was made in 2016.
Wow, that's remarkably prescient.
What does prescient mean? My vocabulary is not that wide.
He foresaw.
Yeah.
That event. I don't know why. Again, I don't know why more people haven't recognized this, because that's remarkably.
I think a lot of people. I mean, I think that in any circles of people who are talking about Atlanta, a lot of people recognize that this was absolutely.
Why did I have to scroll down through like so many pages of Google searches to see that? I don't know.
To confirm that it was made in 2016, yeah. Probably because people just assumed that it was made in 2016 because it was.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, like, people who were watching this show would remember that scene who watched this show when it aired would have remembered that scene from before 2020. And, like, again, like, I don't see any reason to assume that they would have edited it back in, you know, because that would definitely have been, like, that would be the header of the article.
So it is, like, strangely out of place with all the other comedic commercials, though. Like,
I don't think so. I mean, I think that it's not as funny now that there's footage of a police officer kneeling on a black man's neck, like almost identically to what happens. Yeah.
Wow. And it has.
I think that was the intention, because again, it's the juxtaposition, or it's the contrast between, like, oh, it's a cute, funny kids commercial with the brutal reality of what you could imagine actually happening.
Wow. All right. Final scene.
Oh, yeah. Wait, and then I'll just say that real life was even more fucked up than what happened in this commercial.
Oh, sure.
So,
the guy died.
Yeah. So just, like, it's really crazy, I
guess
that or not even crazy, but it's just, like, really illustrative that, you know, that, like, this was that, like, they pointed this out. I think I think it was intended primarily for comedy, or I don't know, like 50-50, whatever ratio you want to say. I think it was meant to be funny and also point out a real social issue that was going on in 2016. And then the fact that, and even that, you know, there were probably, based on that, you know, there were probably dozens of George Floyds back before 2020. And, you know, the George Floyd that we all know just happened to be the one that had, like, a clear enough, like, a bystander taking footage of the situation that it was able to, like, go viral and get a bunch of people mad, you know, and that situation was even worse than what was presented in this, like, fake commercial. Yeah. So, you know,
all right, let's go to the final scene, because I'm running out of gas myself.
Yeah.
The last scene is back in the studio with Montague, where they have Harrison now on a remote camera, and this is after his surgery, apparently, or, you know, in quotation, surgery, because all we see is the same guy, except he's got a blonde wig on and like straight blonde hair, and Paperboy immediately starts mocking him. He's calling him, like, all sorts of names, some of which I didn't understand, but despite the fact that he's just ruthlessly, like, making fun of the guy, Harrison seems to side with Paperboy's right to express himself. Like, Montague tries to sort of shush him and tries to challenge Paperboy, but Harrison strangely sides with Paperboy's right to express himself. And when Deborah goes back to the argument about trying to connect the trans issue to other identity issues and problems that the Black community has with the trans community. We again see Harrison just doesn't get the connection. There's like a disconnect with him because he actually like objects to the idea that a man might turn himself into a woman. He says that's just unnatural, and then he goes on to say that he's not into gay marriage. And Deborah is just you see a shot of Deborah, she's just dumbfounded. She doesn't get it. So again, I think this. I don't know if this is meant to be just overtly funny, but
I think this is meant to be partially funny and partially just saying not everybody is perfect. You know, like like. Just because you're a member of one minority doesn't mean that, again, I think it's the, you know, don't think of people as just good or evil, you know, like just because somebody is a minority or experiences oppression doesn't mean that they have the correct political opinions on everything.
And so a trans person, if we can call this
a trans person can be racist, a Black person can be transphobic, you know, like
can be bigoted.
A woman can be the racist, anything like.
Yeah.
Like, just because you shouldn't just assume you shouldn't. Like in this case, I think this could be like more of a like an overt like criticism of like people who kind of just use like heuristics of like it's kind of like the like, oh, I have a Black friend, and like they just like, or like believing not that I have a Black friend, but like just like believing somebody has the right take on any sort of particular political take just because of their status as XYZ minority, right?
Sounds like you just said you don't have any Black friends.
Oh, I mean, I do. Not that matters.
Not that matters. No. Well, yeah,
it's fine.
I think you're right. No, I think your analysis is right. I think it might have been more effective had they. I mean, if they really wanted to drill down on that thing that, like all groups can be like bigoted or prejudiced towards all other groups. They might have used like a gay character who like had some hostility towards a trans character, because I think that happens, or a feminist character.
I mean, yeah, it happens, but like I don't know, I don't see why why would what happens in the show as it is not be sufficient for sending that message?
Well, I mean, just the idea that there's a lot of, well, I guess they're not trying to say there's a lot, but the idea of using a transracial character, that's pretty far out there in terms of like what percentage of people are actually transracial, like versus, you know, a person who...
Yeah, they're the most oppressed. They're the most minor.
Like, but all right, yeah, but like
I'm being facetious.
I mean, but I have heard that there are some gay men that question, you know, the
validity of trans people.
Yeah, I'm trying to use the right word. The validity of
I mean, there's definitely there's definitely a group of like trans men, like assigned female at birth people who are transitioning to male.
No, the other way around.
Okay, yeah, that would be trans women.
Yeah.
No, there's absolutely a group of I mean, they call themselves TERFs, which I'm sure you know, it's trans exclusionary radical feminists. But within that group is kind of a group of lesbians who kind of like to peddle the argument that like the existence of trans women is trying to like force lesbians to date men in disguise, right? And like you know, which isn't the case. But yeah, that's just to say that like there is like a group of people who are of one minority status, which in this case would be homosexual women, who are, you know, kind of trying to like use a core part of their identity, which is the fact that they are lesbian, as a means of invalidating and debasing another minority on the merits of what their, you know, minority status is. Although you know, lesbians who are like attacking trans women, saying that like, oh, you're just trying to get into my pants, even though you're a man. Like, they don't believe that trans women are women. They believe that they're men. So in their eyes, they're like punching up and they're not attacking another minority.
Wow.
But, you know,
Oh man, I'm confused. I think I'm just tired. But I
gotta educate
know
yourself.
I that's actually
Gotta
where
get
I was
woke.
going with that argument is the turf argument because it's another example of like who do we side with like as a straight white male who
Side with non-turfs. I'll make it easy for you. Side
no,
with non-turfs.
uh,
Turfs are I mean, to anybody listening, if anybody listening doesn't really know uh, much about it, TERF stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist, and it's basically a group of feminists, of like third wave feminists who
oh I
believe.
guess I'm specifying lesbian then.
Yeah, there's a subcategory within TERFs that are lesbians.
That's the
The centralized umbrella, like the thing that all TERFs like rally around is that trans people, specifically trans women, because they only care about like trans women, and they think that like all trans men are just like misguided women who are trying to escape like who are trying to escape like being the fact that like women are oppressed in society by not being a woman anymore. But what they really rally around is hating trans women, and they all have different reasons for thinking that, and they'll come up with a million different reasons for thinking that, even if they are contradictory. You know, the popular one is the bathroom, where you know they claim that men are going to invade women's spaces, quote unquote, you know, completely forgetting that like sexual assault is already illegal, and that, you know, sexual assault in bathrooms like that never happens. Like, there's no scientific evidence to prove that happens.
yeah, we can
There is
have another
only anecdote.
conversation about
There is
that.
only anecdote. There is literally only singular stories. There are no statistics that prove that happens at all. Uh, and then, you know, the other argument that like I just went over is lesbians saying that like, oh, I've dated trans women who didn't tell me that they were trans until like we were about to have sex, and then I went, whoa, you have a dick, you're sexually assaulting me, right? Which is like, again, anecdotal evidence and no actual statistics that are proving that kind of
do you think
thing is
that
happening en masse, or even that like lesbians are being like forced to date trans women.
well,
Yeah.
we can save this for another day. I think we're way long in this episode. But yeah, just to summarize, I think this was one of the best episodes like of all of them. I think this one
I
stands
agree.
out. In
This
my
is one of the best
mind.
episodes in the entire series.
Very very creative um, in terms of like how they introduce these commercials in there, and you know the comedy was all over the place, and yet they still had these underlying currents that you know have to do with social issues surrounding gender and identity. So they weaved it together very nicely, and I just found it very enjoyable.
Yeah. No, it's really like I completely see why this episode has been longer than the others, because like it really is just kind of uh I think this episode, what it's about is trying to like illustrate what, you know, modern American like politics are like, but in like a jovial, like making as many jokes as you can at every opportunity kind of way, and making things exaggerated enough to make it clear what in that moment the directors and editors and script writers are like trying to get at, while also presenting the very real like complexity of, you know, American politics as they exist right now, and how a lot of people have a lot of different goals which are oftentimes in conflict with one another, and how, you know, individual, and how the, you know, the media kind of plays off of that and makes it hard for anybody to get anything done really. And
Mm.
it's a very thought-provoking episode, which is why I like it a lot. And it does a really good job at, like I said at kind of near the beginning of this episode, is that I think that any interpretation coming out of this episode is very much valid, because I don't think the episode itself is really trying to take much of a side. If anything, I guess you could say that like it puts faith in the audience that like they're not like it puts faith in the audience that they're not going to be like, oh, this show is telling me that transgender people and transracial people are the same, and therefore transgender people are not valid, and we shouldn't give them like healthcare, or we shouldn't like give them rights to transition or anything like that. Like, I think the show is like trusting that that's not the takeaway that you're going to come away with, even though, like, again, you know, like the butt of the joke of Harrison, you know, comes at the expense of, you know, real life trans people, you know. Already went over all that, but
Okay. Well, why don't you wrap us up and send us on our way? And,
yeah.
encourage our
One
viewers or listeners to sponsor us.
Yeah. Once again, hugely would appreciate any kind of support you guys want to show on Patreon. You know, right now we are still under 1,000 subs on YouTube, which means that we can't monetize these videos just via ad revenue. So that's the only way that we're going to be making money right now. So, and you know, hopefully it's the kind of content that you guys would be willing to throw a few bucks towards. And hey, you get some pretty cool bonuses for doing so, which I already mentioned. But you know, if you don't feel like that's really in your ballpark, you know, subscribing is free, liking the video is free. We would hugely support sharing the video around with any of your friends if you think that it would, you know, if you think that people would enjoy it. Obviously, all the YouTube algorithm stuff is majorly appreciated as well. So I think that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you guys once again for watching, and I guess we'll catch you in episode 8.
Okay, thanks. Good night.